Just to talk about lupus 101, and as you mentioned earlier, is that lupus is one of those conditions that can affect everybody or many people, but it can affect them in different ways. And people walk into your office or into our office looking like they're the picture of health, but may have all kind of issues going with it. This is that. So I wanted to talk about just a little brief thing about what is lupus. I'm going to give a little bit about the history of lupus, but not so much. I really want to make emphasis on the bottom. It's the pathophysiology of lupus. What makes lupus tick in a lot of people? And we'll find that there's a lot of things that we've learned over the years that lupus does, or the mechanism of how it works in patients. But if we only found out about that in about I'll say probably about 10 to 18%, that means the other 90 to 92% of people, we don't know what in the world's going on. That's a big statement to make about a disease. Let's say if we had that same talk about congestive heart failure, there would be an uproar. If we had the same talk about a person that had diabetes, there'd be an uproar, right? This is so we need to have an uproar about lupus too. This that the prevalence of systemic lupus erythematosus, and I don't know if you can see my little light here, in the United States is about 20 to 150 per 100,000. And if you look at that number and then look down at the bottom, the Caucasian women is about 164 per 100,000. African American women is about 406 per 100,000. So it's that there's already a disproportionate thing. Now, how do you get 164 and 406 and only get 150 per 100,000 people? There's something wrong with the math right there, isn't it? So there's some things that I think that we still don't have the issues figured out about. This is that a prevalence in North and South America, Europe, and Asia is about 1 in 25 per 100,000. So how many of us want to move over there to try to get rid of this thing? Or get away from it? This is that there's a gender in SLE. This is that the children make about, the ratio between females and males and children is not that different. It's about 3 to 1, whereas if it comes in adults, it's about 7.5 to 15 to 1. So I'll say an average about 10 to 1 in women compared to males. And the older adults, that ratio starts to narrow just a little bit. But there must be something different about women and about men. So can we figure out what is the difference? Why is there such a difference between women and men in terms of this disease? This is that at least 3 gene variants of locations on the X. That's supposed to be X, and forget the E right there. You're trying to get rid of men there. So this is that we know there's an IRAC1 gene, an MECP2, a TLR7, which actually is going to be becoming more and more important, I think. Now, this is basically we call it toll receptor. This is the opening on the cells of different, the opening in the cells of different tissues, whether it be in your kidney or whether it be in your heart or whether it be in your muscles. These receptors seem to predispose people to lupus. If we find that people with Klinefelter syndrome have 2 X's and a Y, or 14 times more likely to develop lupus than other men with only the 1 X. So it seems that there's something different about that X chromosome in patients. This is that Turner syndrome. These are patients that have an X and they're forgetting about the Y. This is that. And we don't want to forget about the Y in lupus either. But this seems to be less likely to develop lupus, those patients. So it seems like there's something with that Y chromosome also. This is at the age of onset of lupus. That in that picture that we just saw, or that movie that we just saw, you saw that it ranged from very young to even to very old patients or older patients, which I think that there may be a little bit of discrepancy. And not that older patients don't get it. I bet that they actually had it for a longer time than they really realized it, though. Is that we found out that there was a study, a Swedish study, that they looked at patients that developed lupus or were found to have lupus, and they would go back and look at their blood from years earlier. They found that about 10 years or so, 10 or so years, people have had the positive blood test for lupus, but didn't have enough of a symptom to be looked for. And so I think that sometimes we're missing some of these patients. What do we do about that information once you find it? We don't know yet. But I think that we're missing patients along the way that maybe we could have done something to probably prevent some of the kidney damage or the heart or lung or other organ system damage is done. This is that, and there seems to be a difference in terms of men and women in terms of the age that we're making that diagnosis. White females between 37 and 50 years of age, white males from 50 to 59 years of age, black females 15 to 44 years of age, and black males between 45 and 64 years of age. And it turns out that black males, even though they're less frequent than black females in terms of getting the disease, their disease tends to be much more aggressive on average. So I think that we need to really pay a lot more attention to where these men are. And I wonder how many men are in the room here today. See that being outnumbered? So I think that I only saw 2 men in here, or 3 men. I don't know if you have lupus back there or not. So this is a get your blood test. We may find maybe to join us. This is that in the African Americans and Mexican Hispanics, they tend to have a more aggressive kidney involvement with lupus. African Americans tend to be more likely to have the anti-SM antibody, which actually seems to be one that promotes a more aggressive form of lupus as well. There's another one antibody which is not up here, was a newer antibody, it's the anti-chromatin antibody. Both of those seem to be predisposed more to kidney disease. I don't hope nobody talks about me with this. This is that because we know that also that they tend to have more psychosis, and it turns out that even though black men have more kidney involvement, more heart involvement, fortunately we don't have as much brain involvement. So this is that I don't mean that we don't have as much brain involvement in terms of it doesn't work, but I mean that our brains don't seem to be affected as much by lupus. Men with lupus tend to have a higher frequency of kidney disease, skin manifestations. They tend to have more blood clots, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and inflammation in the blood vessels. We don't see as many people with men with Raynaud's phenomenon, though. This is that the children tend to be more symptomatic with their lupus, or this at the onset, or at least at the time of diagnosis. The older people seem to have a little bit milder disease when they're at the time of diagnosis, and then that tend to have less of the rashes or less of the things that we look for that we make that diagnosis of lupus with. That malar rash or the sores in the mouth or the digital infarcts, but they tend to have a little bit more of that mouth dryness or the Zika symptoms. So you can think that maybe they have Sjogren's syndrome and may miss the diagnosis of lupus, although Sjogren's and lupus are very like sisters, I would say. This is this is one I wanted was alluding to earlier. There seems to be some genetic predisposition to lupus in some of the patients. But it turns out that we know that there are a bunch of genes that they're found, I think over about 50 or so genes, but that it only accounts for maybe about 18% of the people that have lupus. In other words, we see people have lupus in the studies, you look for these genes, you don't find them in 82% of the people. So how do these people get lupus? So that we think there must be some genetic features that may happen or that predispose to lupus as well. I may talk about that a little bit later on in the talk. This is one that's they kind of hammered into our heads in training, because this is a condition that can cause symptoms that look very much like lupus. Matter of fact, it may even be one of the causes for lupus in patients that have a genetic loss or they don't make this C1q or C1q protein. This is one of the proteins that set off that classical pathway of complement degradation. They were saying that some people have this TREX1 genes that have mutations in it, so that it doesn't perform as quickly or as readily, and it actually tends to cause abnormal amounts of DNA or dysfunction of that DNA. You may get some polymorphisms in DNA repair. In other words, it may repair some of the DNA. When DNA gets damaged, your body may be able to repair parts of it and not other parts of it, and those parts that don't get repaired may not function the way it should function. This is just kind of like a cartoon that talks about lupus, and it's basically everybody has cells that are dying all the time. And those cells, when they die, they release their contents into the bloodstream. and we have cells that go around and do the cleanup or sweep up and get things out of that, the bad things out. But some of these people that have this, with lupus that have this problem, they don't clean up very well. This is that, the sweeper, just, when you have your kids, to tell them to clean the floor, they clean out the middle, but leave all the corners and, dirty. I think that people with lupus, their cells seem to do the same thing. They kind of clean up little pieces, but leave other parts alone. But when they do clean it up, they don't even clean it up correctly. In other words, that these cells, when they go to clean up those foreign particles, those cells are either activated or not activated. Those that get activated may do what they're supposed to do, but they may be overly activated. They may be not only go clean up the things that they need to clean up, but they may clean up things that are parts of your body that resemble that organism or that bacteria or whatever that foreign body or that tumor cell is. And so they may go and start fighting off things that they don't need to fight off. We were talking about the defective clearance. Complement deficiency. This was that when I was talking about that C1q. That complement actually tends to join on to these antibodies and kind of enhance the effectiveness of antibodies. Also, complement actually attacks those abnormal cells themselves and actually drill a hole right through those cells and cause those cells to disintegrate. But if you don't have that complement, then your fast activity in terms of trying to get rid of that disease is not, or that condition is not very good. Complement is one of the proteins that your body uses to help to fight off infections right away. We don't have to wait a day or 2 days or 3 days to make those or generate those antibodies. These work right away. You get natural killer cells work right away. You got something called memory cells after they've been exposed to whatever that organism is. Now that cell remembers what that organism looks like and knows how to go after it. But now that the people with lupus, these cells don't quite. I think it went too fast. These cells don't quite know what they're doing. And then one of these cells, so what we would do is we want to try to get rid of those cells or try to minimize that activity of those cells. And then that one, put my light in my pocket. This is that one of those cells, one of those chemicals of trying to get rid of that is that there's something called B lymphocyte stimulator factor. These are those B cells that are being overly stimulated and trying to make them last or live longer than they should live. And then there's a chemical called benlizumab that's come out to try to block the release of that B cell lymphocyte stimulator factor, so it deactivates that factor so that it doesn't stimulate those cells that are influenced by lupus to keep on living longer than they should, so that we get new cells that come on that know how to do the cleanup. This is that we also think that we're making antibodies against yourself. So those antibodies that the normal cells make are making antibodies that are directed against the wrong thing. They may have been exposed to something that was very similar to the amino acid sequence on the different cells. Now instead of recognizing those cells, it starts going and acting up against cells that are normal and don't know how to stop it. This is that complement pathway. Actually, the one we're interested in is the one on I guess to be your left. Is that complement pathway? Is that things are say you got infected by some organism that ought not to be there. You start making IgM antibody and IgG antibody, which forms complex with this complement. There's that C1 complement. If you have a deficiency on this one, you have a hard time activating the rest of that pathway there. So that, how you put it, some people say blame it on the hormones. This is that, I think that we find that this is kind of like a controversial subject, and it's mainly that there was one nurse's study that showed, this was, I forget what year it was, but it showed that patients that had early, or ladies that had early menstrual periods, or start the menstrual periods early, and lasted for a longer or later duration, actually tended to have more activation of the lupus, or more likely to develop lupus. But other studies don't really show that as much, and particularly we talked about the estrogen replacement therapy, like in birth control pills, or in people that taking them for hormones for postmenopausal states. So that has become a big controversy a little bit now. But but some of the studies actually now are showing that low-dose hormones may not have that much effect on lupus at all. That's that, but we do have to be careful because that we know that estrogen actually promotes blood clotting in people, makes the blood clots more likely to happen. It actually tends to make the circulating neutrophils actually stick to the walls of the blood vessels. And if you have walls of blood vessels are damaged, or you have cells that attach to the wall of the blood vessels that are acting funny, then it may cause more damage to the blood vessels. So there's a little bit of up and down with this. I'm happy for that hormone for men. This is that because it seems to make that T cell proliferation a little bit less aggressive, and it increases the number of CD8, which are called suppressor cells, which actually tends to downregulate the activity. But it's that this Th2 response is the one that tends to call it the T helper. It tends to go out and try to tell those B cells to go and do what you need to do. You know, that progesterone and estrogen both tend to do that, so it may be a little bit conflicting there. This is that there are a bunch of immune problems that are abnormalities in lupus, and these are the things that we need to really find out about. And I think a lot of research needs to go into that because there's so many problems that are happening that we really don't understand what the mechanism is. But the biggest thing, and what I alluded to earlier, these cells don't know how to clean up very well. And we're making these abnormal autoimmune complexes, but we can't get rid of them as well as we should. These cells that are dying, which is apoptotic cells or the necrotic cells, are defective in lupus. The clearance of them is defective in lupus. Yeah, this is that B cell lymphocyte stimulator factor, but this is this Th17 cells promote autoantibody formation. Whereas Th17 also is important in patients with psoriatic arthritis and psoriasis. Maybe this also helps to promote why some of the lupus patients get so many rashes that they get. So whether the discoid rashes or the subacute cutaneous type rashes, because it tends to be a lot of involvement in the skin. Is that the NK cell dysfunction. These natural killer cells. They don't know what to do or what to mess with. Now we think that, and nobody has really proven this, but we also know that when you look at the blood of some patients with lupus and you check for the antibodies to these different bacteria or even the virus particle itself with Epstein-Barr, is that seems to be higher incidence or higher volumes or amounts of that in patients with lupus. Does that mean that these started the lupus off? We don't really know. But it's just but there have been reports of patients who develop these infections tend to develop the manifestations that go along with lupus. So that it may not be necessarily that every patient had Epstein-Barr virus infection or they had TB infection or whatever, but they may have been exposed to something in the environment that kicked it off. Ultraviolet light is also seems to be a big stimulator, at least in the skin. Now, but the problem is that once you get the skin or the ultraviolet light affecting your skin, it gets those keratinocytes to start making abnormal DNA. It may not be limited to the skin. These different cytokines may get into your bloodstream and promote this involvement in your kidney or in your lung or some other part of your body when they're circulating. This is that I wanted to put up because how can something in your hand kind of affect the rest of your body? And I think it works better than the transportation system in most cities. In terms of that, we got our blood that gets pumped out from the heart from the pumping station and goes all the way from different blood vessels there. These inflammatory cytokines follow that same pathway, and go to, if you have an antibody that's going to attack your kidney, it goes through the bloodstream. When it gets to the kidney, it starts to precipitate in that kidney or whatever other organ it is. This is that. That's when you have those immune complexes start to form, and they may form in different places, that it becomes a big mess. Because it's that when antibodies and complement attack the antigen, an immune complex is formed, and that's a big fight going on here. There's a big fight in terms of it kind of recruits other things to go to that area. In this picture, these are actually normal cells. I mean, this is something we should actually have. Everybody should have it. We need these helper cells. We need these suppressor cells. We need the B cells. But you got some policeman that's in the middle that tries to regulate, either upregulate or downregulate the activity of these cells. And it turns out that this cell is messed up in a lot of patients with lupus. This T regulatory cell, they just don't know when to shut the system down or to slow it down. We need to do more research on this. And I have a feeling that it may not be the answer for everybody, but it may be a better answer in terms of how can we learn how to treat these patients better. This is that T regulatory cell. This is basically that cell that, you got these white blood cells that are circulating to the system that are, let me just drop back just a little bit, and I wanted so we can explain this a little bit better. That we have, everybody is making white cells in their bone marrow. That once the white cell gets from the bone marrow, goes to the bloodstream, they tend to go to the lymphatic system. So we see some people with these enlarged lymph nodes and things like that. Because that the lymph node is basically the place where these white blood cells learn how to do what they need to do. And so that if you have the cells that are very sensitive and they want to go attack everything in the world, that lymph node gets rid of these cells. We don't need you. You're a little bit too eager to get out and do what you need to do. Just that we got those other cells that are very apathetic. They don't want to do anything. The body said, no, we got to get rid of you. You're going to get out there and just play around. Just that we got some other cells that are just right. They have the right affinity. They're going to attack the right thing. They've been taught to go just for this particular antigen and nothing else. But now, once they get out into the system, if there's nothing there that either stimulates them to go to do what they need to do, or there's too much there that inhibits what they need to do, then either way they won't function properly. So we need these T regulatory cells that tell them either to slow down or we got to speed up. And so that and so basically we know that these are what's called antigen presenting cells. These are the cells that go out and they find these bad things in your system, and then they go and take it to basically that T cell that just came out of your lymph node into your circulation, and then it tries to present whatever that bad antigen to that cell. But if this can't not connect to that cell, because you have to have two sites in order to activate a T cell, and if it can never bind to that other site, you don't get any response. So this activity doesn't happen. If you got a B cell, an antigen cell that attached to this T cell, and also has that second binding site, then there's a lot of activity going on. And then there's, if we can do something if the cell is overly activated, if we can do something to block that, we can also downregulate that abnormal function of that cell. And I think that's benlizumab is one of the examples of this activity happening. But that benlizumab may not help everybody because it may not be the B cell that's the problem in a person. Maybe the T cell is the problem in the person. Maybe a macrophage is the problem in the person. Or maybe that complement deficiency. And then wherever that cell goes through your circulation system, if it ends up in the lungs, you may get this lung this looks like a piece of liver, doesn't it? So this is you can end up with severe interstitial lung disease with lupus. It may get in your skin, and you may get the skin problem with lupus. If it gets in your heart, you may get, this is have the Liebman Sachs. I don't know if you can see it back there, but these are the chorda tendini. Right at the end of the chorda tendini, there's a calcification or a thickening or scarring there that causes the malfunction. It looks like a vegetation, almost like you had a bacterial infection, but it's not. And this is that cartoon that's kind of demonstrating it. And if it gets into your kidney, now this is very important because the kidney is a very big filter for this. And if you had an upregulation of that complement that attaches to the membrane, or if the antibodies attached to the membrane, or if you got these abnormal cells attached to the membrane of some place in your kidney, you can end up with different or various kidney involvement. And the kidney, many people that may present with kidney disease actually may be due to lupus and have absolutely a normal blood test for lupus. And we don't find out until I can remember 2 patients now recently. We didn't know they had lupus until we did a kidney biopsy and found it. So it can be a very tricky situation in some people making a diagnosis. And then this is just to say that sometimes we had to start someplace. The medicines that we started with are good medicines, but they got you to where we got. But I think I like this car a little better. And this is And so the medicines that we have now is getting a little bit further along, but I don't want to stop there. We want to reach for the moon. This is it. Thank you very much.